Hey guys, I'm Archie, and welcome to the third video in my SDL2 tutorial series. In the previous video, we were able to create a window. So if we run this program, here we go. We have a blank window that can move around, and we can close it by clicking the X button. In this video, we're going to be adding what's called a renderer to the window, which basically allows you to draw things to the window. The first thing we're going to do is go to window.h, and inside our class, we're going to add a new member variable. It's going to be of type SDL renderer, which is the object that we use, to make renderers. Just like we have SDL window here to make a window. So SDL underscore renderer. We're going to make this a pointer as well. And I'm going to call it renderer equals null pointer. Now let's go into window.cpp into our init method. So below the window initialization, we're going to do the renderer initialization. It's going to look very similar. So we're going to say renderer equals SDL create renderer. The first parameter is the window that we're using, so we're going to pass in our window variable. The second parameter is some index. Let's read about it right here. It says the parameter index is the index of the rendering driver to initialize, or just -1 to initialize the first one supporting the requested flags. So essentially, we're going to be using flags in the third parameter, so if we write -1 here, SDL is going to determine what to put. So for the flags, there are a few options here. It's asking for what mode of renderer we want to use. We're going to use what's called SDL underscore render accelerated. And this is a fast mode. In fact, you're probably going to hear your graphics card hiss a little bit because the frame rate is going to be so fast. If you want to slow it down a little bit, which actually we might want to, we could do SDL render present vsync. And vsync is just going to cap the frame rate at like 60 frames per second. But let's just do accelerated for now. Okay, now we can check if the renderer was created successfully. So we'll say if renderer is still a null pointer, then let's give them a similar error message to the window and return 0. We're going to say failed to create renderer. There we go. Then it's going to return true if everything worked out. Also, let's go into the constructor. I realized this is kind of inefficient. All we could do is just write closed equals the opposite of init. So this means if init returns 0, which means something failed, then we're going to take the opposite of that 0, which is true, and set it equal to closed. So closed is going to be true. If init returned true, or something that's not 0, which was successful, then we're going to take the opposite of that, set it equal to closed, so then closed is going to be false. So if the initialization was successful, then closed is false. If the initialization failed, then closed is true. Now we can get rid of this. Now in our destructor, we're going to do something similar to our window. We're going to say SDL destroy renderer, and then pass in the renderer. Great, now we have a renderer. The next thing we're going to want to do is make a function that actually draws something to the screen. We're going to call this function clear. So let's put underneath the poll events, void clear. And we can make this const. It's not going to change anything in our class. And the word clear in this case just means to put stuff onto the screen. Now we can copy this clear function and implement it in window.cpp. Let's go to the bottom. Don't forget to add window in the beginning. Okay. So to actually clear stuff onto our screen using a renderer, the first thing we're going to do is give the renderer sort of a color. To do this, we're going to write STL set render draw color. The first parameter is the actual renderer, so let's pass that in. And the rest of the parameters are just the color. So first we have R. I'm going to make this blue, so I'll just make this 0, 0, 200. And A is for alpha, so that's the opacity. Let's just make it fully visible. So let's put 255. Next, we are going to call SDL render clear, and then pass in the renderer. This function actually clears the color we just set to the renderer, but it's kind of like behind the scenes. You still can't see it yet. To actually present the renderer, we're going to call SDL render present, and then pass in the renderer. So let's go through these three functions again. Set render draw color just sets the color we want to make the renderer. SDL render clear actually gets the color onto the renderer, and then render present actually puts the color onto the screen. If we go into main, we can actually keep calling this clear function while the window is not closed. So while the window isn't closed, it's going to keep the color on. So window.clear, and now we can actually run it. As you can see, the window is blue now, and we can close it. I'm also going to show you how to make a rectangle on the screen. To do that, go into window.cpp, and let's make some space in here for the rectangle. Make sure render present is at the end. We want to present the render after everything on it has been prepared. So let's go ahead and make an SDL rect. So type SDL underscore rect, and you can call it rect. First, we're going to set its width and height. So we're going to say rect.w, or width, equals 120. That's what I want the size to be. And then rect.h, for the height, equals 120 as well. We're going to make this a square. Next, we're going to set the position on the screen. So we're going to say rect.x, the x coordinate of the rect, equals, well, what's the middle of the screen? Let's take the width of the screen and divide it by 2. What does that give us? That gives us the center point on the screen. This is actually not enough, because if we put the rectangle in the center point of the screen, then it's actually going to be a little bit to the right, and you'll see what I mean. But let's just keep it like this, and you'll see what problem is going to occur. Let's also put rect.y, the y coordinate, equals the screen's height divided by 2. If you're at all confused about these two variables, let's go back into window.h, and they are right here. We set them in the initialization. So it's the screen's width and the screen's height. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to set the render draw color again, but this is going to be the render draw color of the square. So let's go ahead and copy this, and let's make it pink. So I'm going to set it to 200, 0, 200. That'll make it pink. Then we're actually going to fill the rectangle with this color. We're going to call SDL render fill rect. First, we're going to pass in the renderer, which contains the information about this color. So renderer. Then we're going to pass in the rect. Now, if you look at the second parameter, it takes in a pointer of the rect. So we're actually going to need to pass in its address, like this. And this should be it. Now we're going to present the renderer, and we should see a square. So let's run it. As you can see, we have a pink square. But as I said, it's not in the middle of the screen. But what is in the middle of the screen? Look at this point, the upper left point of the square. That's smack dab in the middle of the screen. We set this rectangle to be positioned at this point, but we want the middle of the rectangle to be positioned at that point. Then it'll be centered. How do we do that? Well, let's close out of this. And all we have to add is we have to subtract half of the rectangle's width and height. So I'm just going to put these in parentheses to make it clear. So that's the width of the screen divided by 2 minus half of the width of the rectangle. So rect.w divided by 2. Then the same thing for the height. I'll put it into parentheses, and again, I don't really need parentheses because of the order of operations, but I'm still going to do it because it looks cleaner. So the half of the screen's height minus half of the rectangle's height. Now if we run it, the square is right in the middle of the screen. So that's about it for this video. We were able to make a renderer, we were able to fill the renderer with a blue color, and then draw a square in the middle of the screen that's pink. I hope this video was helpful, and I will see you next time.